Hey IT friends, how's it going? It's been a while since I've made any content because I've been really busy. There was a slide, a couple years ago, I threw up at MSP GeekCon, which I will put up in editing, that shows the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule in sales, kind of flipped around, showing that about 80% of the escalations that are driving you crazy as a manager, lead tech, escalation tech, are really only coming from probably about 20% of your help desk tier ones, whoever's escalating to you. That doesn't mean that 80% of your escalations are only coming from those people. I just mean the ones that drive you crazy. And so I want to talk based on that a little bit about how escalations work, sort of some general definitions of escalations, and get into really there's only 3 reasons a MSP employee is actually going to do what we would consider to be a functional escalation, and what you can do to help make that whole experience a little bit better for everybody. As you know, if you have watched my videos, most of the ticketing tools we use in the MSP space are at least loosely based on ITIL concepts. So starting there, ITIL defines an escalation pretty clearly. The process of escalating incidents or service requests that cannot be resolved at the initial level to higher support levels. And they further break it down into 2 types: functional escalations, which is what we're going to focus on in this video, which are escalations to a more specialized skilled team where the initial team lacks the necessary expertise, or hierarchical escalations, which involve escalating to higher management due to critical nature or impact of the issue. And ITIL further goes on to stipulate we have 3 classic trigger points: the SLA, the complexity or severity of the incident, and or the need for additional approval or authority. But MSPs are ITIL adjacent. We have other considerations at play that make our interpretation of this slightly different. In a internal IT department, sysadmin, corporate enterprise, whatever word you want to use for it, ultimately, if we think of there being sort of 3 sort of buckets, there is the tech team that's working the tickets, there are the users that generate and need help with the tickets, and then there's sort of this nebulous cloud above that of managers or stakeholders. If we are in classic internal IT, which ITIL is designed for, then somewhere up the chain, we have a shared manager or stakeholder. If I'm in IT and I'm supporting the finance department, finance doesn't work for me, I don't work for finance, but somewhere up the corporate ladder, we both report to one boss. And so a lot of ITIL escalation management is designed around this being a given, that the IT team and whatever team they're supporting have a shared stakeholder and have some of the tools that having a shared stakeholder gives you. MSPs fundamentally do not have this. No matter what your relationship is with your client, we do not ultimately actually have a shared stakeholder. We may be cooperating, we may be allies, we do not share a boss. And so we are removed of those tools, both the positive ones and the baseball bat ones. I cannot go to somebody higher in the company to say that Janet from accounting is being a pain in the ass and dragging down the ticket. Go force her to help me. I cannot do that. You can't do that in an MSP. And if you've tried, you know what I mean. It does not work. We are left with a higher burden of communication, and the hygiene and quality of our escalations needs to be a little bit better in an MSP than it may be for our sysadmin cousins. So let's talk about escalations just a little bit more. So within an MSP, generally speaking, there are a whole variety of reasons we might escalate, but I'm going to kind of just pare it down to just a handful of examples. We basically have our functional escalations, which is our technical teams issuing escalations to either other people or teams with deeper expertise, such as, tier 2 team or network engineering team or something like that. We have our vendor escalations. That's when we need to escalate to a third-party vendor or software provider because we need assistance with the product. That's still a functional escalation. And as I mentioned before, we have a hierarchical escalations, things like to our account managers, to our manager, to leadership, for a whole variety of other issues. Most MSPs do use some form of SLA. And so it's entirely possible you do have your escalations defined by SLA. if at your MSP you have any sort of metric that says if you've been working on a ticket for X amount of time and you have not resolved it by that time, you should escalate it. That is an SLA-based escalation, even if you are not using those words. Really, the most important element here at the MSP is the client communication. We have to do a lot more of that. So keeping the client informed about the escalation progress, what's happening to their ticket, what's going on, maintaining that transparency and trust, how our ticketing system handles all of that, the notes, the time entries, not appearing like a ticket has switched hands 15 times and you're being asked the same questions over and over again. All of that is stuff we have to deal with at an MSP. And so it behooves us as MSPs to kind of not want escalations. If you're listening to me and you're going, yeah, I don't want escalations. Well, my friend, you are correct. You don't want escalations. Escalations cost you money. They slow down the process. They lower value and pretty much don't do anything positive except eventually either piss off you, the client, or worst case, both of you. So really, we should want no escalations, which would be amazing. But since we don't have that, we have to think about our escalations from a standpoint that a lot of you may have already taken around automation. We want to apply that to that human element here of exactly what is happening, why, how frequently, and at what level in our organization can we have some agency in reducing the escalations? And that's kind of the cool part that we don't talk about a lot. I mentioned automation before. At a typical MSP, if you identify a task that you want to have automated, what's usually how this works? Somebody identifies a repeating task is happening. That could be somebody on the help desk or somebody more senior. And then it typically gets put in front of a mid to senior level employee whose job it is to figure out a automation workflow or even generate an SOP if it doesn't exist to then automate it. Automation done right generally does require initially a higher degree of employee to implement it and sort of tend that automation garden until it's running. But the thing is, if you change slightly the way you're approaching escalations and the data you're asking the people doing the escalations to enter, you will start finding that you can push down and deflect escalations to lower levels of your team and empower less expensive resources to actually start improving the escalation process. How do we do that? Well, first we have to talk about the three main reasons that an MSP employee is going to escalate nearly any functional escalation. So as I have teased a few times, there really are only three reasons. I know it can't be that simple. It is that simple. There are three reasons that an MSP employee is going to do a functional escalation. These are the only three reasons, and 100% of the situations that you have a functional escalation will fall into one of these three reasons. After I go over this, you are saying, but I have escalations that don't fit here. They are either not functional escalations, they are hierarchical escalations, or they are functional escalations and you are just not thinking creatively. What are they? So the first one is the most common. It is also intellectually the easiest one to solve with the least expensive resources. Lack of knowledge or perception of lack of knowledge. The next one is lack of permission. Permissions being explicit permissions in a tool, like I do not have admin role in that tool, or perception of. And the last one, and this one is going to be the most challenging to fix, but may end up being the most rewarding for a manager, is lack of authority. That is that I feel I do not have the ability to make a decision or choice necessary to avoid the escalation. So let's talk about each one of those. So lack of knowledge is pretty cut and dry. This is going to be typically for most MSPs falling very clearly into one of sort of three areas with lack of knowledge. And you'll notice with all three of the points I'm making, I keep saying or perception, because that's really important. You'll see why in a minute. I get a ticket, and that ticket, I'm a level 1, and that ticket is for me to, I don't know, maybe it's a co-managed client, so it's an advanced sounding ticket where an end user says, oh, one of the 𝗲𝗲 roles is broken. And I go, I have no idea what that is. I don't know how to fix a 𝗲𝗲 role, so escalate. that is a lack of knowledge or perception of lack of knowledge. Oh, client's calling in about that copier that has a very specific way it has to be administered. I do not know how to do that. I have no idea what the documentation is for that. Escalate. And another example of that may be I am on the level 1 team. A request has come in to create 3 accounts in Active Directory, and I was never taught how to do that, so escalate. All of these deal with the employee either explicitly lacking the knowledge to perform the task, thinking they lack the knowledge to perform the task, or a combination of those two where the employee is unaware of, unable to, or an SOP or knowledge base article doesn't exist for how to perform the task. So basically the absence of information, whether that's in my brain, in our system, or the absence of me knowing where to look or find that information, or me looking for it and failing to find it, all fall into this bucket, which is going to be the most common bucket that you have. And it is the easiest one to solve if employees are including in their escalation note entry, when basically whatever you've put in place that they have to type out before they can escalate, simply that they don't know how to do it and where they looked and what they looked for in order to find that information. That allows who's ever getting that ticket, which hopefully is just somebody one level above them, to go, oh, yeah, you definitely know how to do that, and push it back with instructions, or to say, here's the link to that article you weren't aware of and send it back with instructions, or to go, huh, yeah, that's weird. Why did the level 1 team get assigned a request to create 10 accounts in AAD? They definitely don't know how to do that, and go address that with whatever is doing your ticket scheduling or ticket routing. In all of those cases, you'll notice right away, if we simply task the employee who is doing the escalation with defining very clearly, I don't have the knowledge to do this, and here's where I looked or what I tried to do to supplement that knowledge and I failed, that typically gives the next lowest level employee enough breadcrumbs to often deflect that escalation back, or very quickly identify an easy to fix issue in the organization. The next one is lack of permission. And so this one is nice and cut and dry, hopefully. Lack of permission is quite simply, let's take that AAD ticket again. Well, I know how to do it, or I know where the SOP is, but step 3 says I need to be an admin in our tenant and I'm not. Therefore, I explicitly lack permission to perform this task. Therefore, I am escalating it. Now, what's kind of cool about this one is the perceptual element is a big part here, especially at MSPs. Many of us at MSPs, even if we do have specialized teams, do make certain like permissions, passwords available to a wider audience than they're necessarily like subject matter intended audience. If you're using a password manager, you know what I'm talking about. This person may in fact absolutely have access to what they need to get to, and they just don't know it. So once again, including that in your note, that maybe a better example might be that I needed to move a file to a file share for the user, and I am getting an error that that user doesn't have permission to move it. My account doesn't, and I have no idea where to find an admin account or, you know, a workaround for that admin account. A little bit of lack of knowledge here, but if I put that in my escalation note, the level 2 or level 3 who gets this might be able to say, oh, yeah, no, you totally have access to our password here. You just weren't aware of it. You're going to go into this tool in our system. You're going to look for this client here, and there you go. And click that button. It's going to push the password in, move the file over. Or you're right, you don't have permission to do that because we use this tool to do it instead. But you can see, once again, very easy to deflect the escalation, or to take note of exactly what it was that caused the escalation, which once again allows us to assess, should that employee have had permission? If not, why were they assigned that ticket? That's probably a triage failure, or dispatch failure. If they should have access and they don't know, why don't they know? And it starts allowing you to deflect, push back, and upskill your lower level teams, not necessarily on how to do everything, but on how to consume and utilize the resources at your MSP properly. So now we get into the last one, which is a little bit esoteric, but I actually think is the most rewarding for a manager, especially an emerging leader or manager, to tackle, because this is what's going to really be that light bulb moment for you that helps you start to identify who your A players are that could grow out of your B players. And that's lack of authority. That's situations where I don't feel that I have the decision-making prowess to do what's necessary in the situation. And what I like about this one is the employee is almost always going to be not necessarily wrong, but not understanding the full scope of how much trust you've actually given them. So first, we'll give a very cut and dry example. A user has reported an issue. I have investigated as an L1, and I have determined in accordance with our SOP that the only fix for this is to reboot, let's say, a terminal server. It's going to be the only way to fix it. And I know that as a level 1, I literally am just not allowed to reboot a production server in the middle of the day. Therefore, I need to escalate it. That's a classic example of a lack of authority. And if your SOP says to do that, this employee has done exactly what they're supposed to do. And I would simply, they would cite that in their notes and move forward and everything is fine. But what if it's an environment, keep that example, what if it's an environment that has a dozen terminal servers, all with load balancing? There's absolutely no reason why a team lead type of level 1 could not reboot one server if the proper SOP has been followed, but they still think they can't. That's where things get interesting. And where it gets more interesting is a lot of us apply conditional judgment or conditional authority. We will tell people, especially lower level employees, you cannot do X except if Y circumstances are in play. That is almost never as well articulated or understood as we as managers think it is understood. Anytime your employee feels that they understand the correct course of action and they are aware of either where the resources are or the tools or the SOP to do it is located, and they just quite simply think they're not allowed to do it, it's helpful to have that highlighted in the escalation, because that allows you as a manager to start thinking more critically, am I bottlenecking? Am I causing decisions to form a pyramid where they all have to funnel to the top to me or a handful of escalation resources? And is that the best way to handle it? And in some cases, the answer is going to be absolutely that's the best way to handle it. But in other cases, you're going to be surprised about some of these things. You're going to look at it and be like, of course not. Of course you're qualified to make that decision. That's why I hired you. Please go and make it. So once again, collecting this information is going to be really helpful for you to build your team. So that's it. Lack of knowledge, lack of permission, or lack of authority. Those are the only reasons an MSP employee does a functional escalation. And every functional escalation fits into those 3 buckets. What do you do with all that? First of all, you should have an escalation workflow defined at your MSP, even if you are 3 people. There should be an escalation workflow defined. I'm not saying you need to get so explicit as work on a ticket for 10 minutes, then escalate. That is totally valid. I'm just not telling you have to do that. But there should be a workflow that's defined of generally how do we do a functional escalation here. And so in the absence of understanding, an employee has something to follow and reference, and this whole conversation has something to be grounded in. Assuming you have that, and that could be very simple. Well, what does good escalation behavior look like? And it starts off with, and this is most important at an MSP, communication, both internally and externally. You need to start off by defining 2 standards. The first standard is, what does internal communication on an escalation look like? That's most typically going to be the node entry, and there really needs to be a literal standard. Think checklist here. You need a formatted note template is honestly one of the best options to use. There should not be any room for interpretation here at any size MSP. There is one way I type in an escalation, and if I did not type my escalation into that standard, I better have a damn good reason or I am going to catch a beating. The same doesn't have to mean complicated. It just means the same. The other thing you need to define is, how do we talk to our clients about escalations? I don't mean the actual email or note or text or phone call itself. That should be defined separately. I mean, policy-wise, how do we let clients know when an escalation is happening? And one of the first questions you need to figure out is, do we? And if your answer is, well, yes, but not always, and sometimes, see why you need it defined? An employee cannot handle yes, but not always, but sometimes. That's an authority scope decision-making issue. They're not going to make the right decision. So that cannot be conditional. You have to have a pretty explicit table, however you want to define it, of when and how we let people know about escalations. There are obviously more things to define beyond that. I think you can figure that out a little bit on your own, or I'll cover it in a future video. But those two need to be defined. You then, within that note that you are doing internally, and in many cases will be the same externally, you need to recap what you did, why you're escalating, and the single most important thing that should be in every single MSP note entry everywhere at every company until the heat death of the universe. What are the next steps? And I will just say this right now, if you work at an MSP where you do not have a next step culture, you don't have to call it that, but where your last note entry is not always summarizing what has to happen next, even if that is literally nothing has to happen next or no next steps, you are doing it wrong. You are doing it wrong. It is a handful of things in this space there is a right and wrong answer to. This is one of them. Every note entry should always have what the next steps are, even if you are a team of one person. I like real-time time entry and second or third person passive. This isn't a lesson on time entry. So whatever you're doing for time entry or note entry, whatever, you need to have some elements in this escalation note. First of all, I need a summary of the work that you already performed. And importantly, if you're escalating, I need to know what you communicated already to the client, even if the client communication is in the ticket or in the note itself. I understand how asinine that is as a person putting the escalation in. Everything's already in the ticket. Why can't the level 2 or the level 3 just read all my emails to the client? They can. They probably will. It is both a courtesy to that person and it improves the ability for everybody to be timely and follow the story. If you just put a sentence in your note entry that simply says that, like, there was an email exchange between me and the client, which you can read in the ticket, the summary of which being that I would follow up with the user again tomorrow morning. That's fine, but you need to let us know what expectations or communication you've had with the client, even if that is no expectations, no communication. You then have to stipulate, and this is what I think a lot of you maybe don't do a great job of doing. Why are we escalating the ticket? And I would be pedantic and literally have them pick knowledge, permission, or authority. And whatever they pick for why they're escalating, what words or terms or places did you search or look for before we escalated? That's super helpful for you as the resource receiving the ticket or as a manager to figure out how to improve your workflow. So if I say I didn't know how to do this, I looked in ITIL, I could not find the SOP, I used these 3 words, and I even did a Google search and was so overwhelmed I had no idea where to start. Fantastic. Do you know how much I know now as a manager? I know that documentation wasn't tagged correctly in ITIL. I know that you haven't been taught properly the right words to use for that subject. I now understand that you don't even have enough literacy in that subject to parse a Google search. That's amazing. I can do so much with that to go help improve your experience as an employee, knowing all of that. And the person who gets the ticket immediately knows why you think they need to work the ticket, and then they have the chance to push it back down to you and educate you. Next steps, even if unknown, they need to be stated. All of this I would put in a template. Most PSAs allow for a standard note or a template. I would have an escalation standard note template you can pick that will just prompt the little boxes that need to be filled out. And honestly, I would take the stance of anything that goes in, I would take this with any note entry, but anything that goes in an escalation note, assume it could be client facing because it may need to be someday for account management. And I say this even at MSPs that tend to keep these types of notes only internal, which is totally fine. Escalation notes, just assume they're going to get printed out someday in front of an unhappy client who's at risk of churning by somebody in account management, because it's going to be evidence for account management that behind the scenes we have our shit together. Don't write in your escalation notes anything like the end user is an idiot. Even I wouldn't do that anyways, but definitely don't do it in your escalation notes. So on the other hand here, we have receiving the escalation. It's been escalated to me. What do I do? So the first thing you should ask yourself when you get an escalation at your MSP, once again, even if you're just 2 or 3 people, is should this be in front of me? Go back to knowledge, permission, authority. Do I even need this? And there are going to be times where the answer is no, but you're going to do it anyways because the needs the situation, it's more convenient. I get that, especially at a smaller MSP, but you should always at least ask yourself that and look for that data point. And whenever possible, do try to push it back down to the person who sent it to you. You want to deflect the escalation. A good MSP should have an escalation deflection ratio well over 60%. You really should. If more than like 40-ish% of your tickets are getting escalated, you're fucking up already as an MSP. That means your front line is useless. Something is already broken if you don't have at least a 60% escalation deflection metric. Try to find a way to push it back. You then want to look at how old is this ticket and how long has the client been waiting, and hopefully somebody put their expectations that were set with the client, because that's super important. At a lot of our organizations, the team receiving escalations is very busy and is smaller. Their capacity and availability are far more limited. If somebody reported a ticket that the L1 said needs an escalation, especially if the L1 did a bad job at setting expectations, that ticket might be 12 hours old, 24 hours old, a few days old, with no communication other than we're working on it, which is a recipe to enrage any client. So check that. And if you see that that ticket has been sitting there and it is old or no expectations were set, even if you're pushing it back, you may need to be the bigger person here and be the adult and reach out to the client to simply reset expectations and do a little bit of touchy-feely. You're a higher level for a reason. You have this skill set. You want to make sure the impact and urgency hasn't changed as a result of the escalation or the time frame. ITIL would say we don't change priorities on an SLA. That is technically correct, but real life sometimes varies, so always check that. And then finally, do you have a clear understanding of what was done, what was communicated, why it was escalated to you, and what they feel the next steps are? And do you agree with all of that? Because if you don't, before you start working on it, you need to be in agreement, because the worst thing you can do with an escalation is call that client and run through all the same shit L1 just did, especially if it was a while ago. There's nothing I hate more than I report an issue, I spend 20 minutes troubleshooting with someone I can tell has no idea what they're doing, where they ask me a bunch of questions, and then you get on the phone 8 hours later and ask me all the same questions. That is what makes me hate an IT department, what makes me hate an MSP. You will churn clients behaving that way. You are better off not calling that client if you don't know that information yet. So at least you can say, I am so sorry this took so long, but let me recap the situation for you, and here's what we're going to do. That is still better than calling somebody and making them feel like they wasted their first touch with your company. You want to respond effectively. You want to close that feedback loop with the submitting technician. So whenever possible, push that escalation back down. Try to take a supportive educational tone. Let them know that they absolutely did have what they needed to get it done. It is okay they didn't understand that. Here is where it is located. You believe in them. You trust them. Have at it. You need to remember that whenever possible, that is better than just doing it quickly yourself. If I just go around, this is literally Delegation 101. If I just go around and do everything quickly myself because I know how to do it, then first of all, I have to do everything. I'm overwhelmed. I lose control of my schedule and no one else fucking learns. So if you are that tier 2, tier 3 at your MSP that says people always come to me with questions and waste all my time, but then I find out that you just do every escalation quickly because you just want to get it out of the way, you are the actual problem. You are causing the problem. It is you. Stop it. Push it back down. Push it back down whenever possible, unless it is going to create a massive situation with the client. Lastly, how we communicated with the client, the dispatcher, if you have a dispatcher, the account manager, if relevant. If it's been escalated, there's a good chance other departments may need to know. Push them back down. Avoid that reverse Pareto principle. 60% deflection rate, I would say, should be your goal. You will be surprised how many tickets, if you take this stance, you can push back down to your level 1s. The easy things are your SOPs suck, your documentation's terrible, your environment's, a mess. You probably already know that. Fundamentally, if everything at your MSP is so complicated that your level 1 team has to constantly escalate. Your level 1 team either isn't a level 1 team, they're level 0, and your level 2 team's level 1 team, so you're hiring wrong, or you are way, way, way overcomplicating how you run your clients. And usually it's the second one. That should be a wake-up call. And if you're hearing me say this and you're saying, Dean, what you don't understand, or our MSP is different. No, what you don't understand is you are absolutely the outlier here. Okay? If you're not a call center with people running through a script on how to reboot a modem, which I think you're not because you're an MSP, your level 1 team should be able to address on their own about 85% of your ticket volume, your reactive ticket volume. And if they can't, and you have more than 40% of those tickets, 40% of that 80-something% getting escalated, you're not providing value. You're not doing your job properly. Everything is askewed. That needs to be fixed. Hope that gives you a little bit more thought process around escalations. And if you are in that escalation role, level 2, level 3, a team lead, a manager, and you're watching this, I hope it gives you some thought process now that maybe you weren't thinking about before, that yes, it absolutely is bullshit if you're drowning in escalations. A functioning organization should not be working that way. That is not correct. That is not healthy. It is important then that you realize that a lot of driving down that behavior is within your control. We do not need to go in and redo the ticketing system. We don't need to retool everything. A lot of that should be controllable in a normal MSP simply by identifying why we're escalating, lack of knowledge, lack of permission, lack of authority, and then pushing that back down whenever possible to the person who escalated it to give them a chance to learn more and actually perform that element of their job. And that's how it works. And this allows you to have a better client experience, a better service experience. It allows you to do a better job training and upskilling your lower level employees. It allows your higher level employees to focus on the tasks that actually require them. And all of it will lead to your clients feeling like this MSP has their shit together, which is going to be really, really hard to replace. It's very sticky when you have that kind of help desk experience to go somewhere else that doesn't. Have a good one, my friends.